people, right? So there's lots and lots of really helpful use cases. But to do any of one of those things, smart home products need to become usable by people beyond techie early adopters.
Hello, my name is Robert Schmidt. I'm Deloitte's Chief Futurist, also known as Mr. IoT. Welcome to my show, Coffee Chat with Mr. IoT. Today, my guest is Yana Welinder. Did I say that right?
You said it right. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Yana, welcome to the show. You are the CEO and co-founder of Kraftful, but really you have a wide experience in Silicon Valley startups and also some well-known startups. Love to hear a little bit about you. What's Kraftful? What really rocks your world right now? And lastly, how are you doing? Are you and your family healthy and safe?
Yeah, we're staying healthy and safe. I think the current situation is putting challenges on most folks, but really excited to be on the show. Thank you for having me. Yeah, happy to chat a little bit about what we do at Kraftful. So I guess the idea behind Crossville is that right now, most smart home brands are putting internet connectivity in each and every one of their products. And the really exciting promise with having more connected products in the home is that it could really help people in more fundamental ways, like help seniors age and be cared for in the home with more dignity, or help people with disabilities feel more empowered in their home. More recently, it can help us all get food delivery without having to interact with people, right? So there's lots and lots of really helpful use cases. But to do any of one of those things, smart home products need to become usable by people beyond techie early adopters. So that's our challenge. We're thinking about how do we standardize user experiences so that everyone can take advantage of this new connected feature, or connected, today, I guess. And
so you work with the companies that make the product, or you work with the end consumer like me, and I can then go and connect all my different products that I have at home? Which one?
Yeah, great question. So we work with hardware enterprises, and so we create user interfaces for end consumers. So smart lights, cameras, thermostats, and lots of other connected products. And the key to our product is that it constantly evolves based on how users interact with those products. But we sell into large hardware enterprises. So we interact with both. We interact with you, and we interact with the company who provided you with the smart home product.
So I'm curious. So I have a house that's fairly connected. It's a small house. That's how I could afford that, because it's actually kind of expensive, I find. But I decided to stick pretty much with one vendor, or one ecosystem, if you wish. Not really one vendor, but one ecosystem. And I find it really complicated. There's all these different parts, and to connect them, even for me as a techie, is fairly complicated. Is this where you come into play? Do you make really connectivity between multiple products work? Tell us what you find and what you found when you started.
Yeah, absolutely. So we primarily optimize devices for mainstream adoption, and what we're seeing from a kind of a mainstream user, it's primarily interaction with one device or a handful of devices. So not so much ecosystems quite yet, though we are thinking about making sure you can connect products in ways that are centered around specific use cases, as opposed to just an integration between two products, where it's just kind of people are thinking about how do I make these two brands talk to each other. We're thinking about it more from an kind of a use case perspective, like you can leverage your lights to now become a security feature where they turn on when your camera senses motion in the house or outside the house. And so how do we make sure that users can turn on those kind of features? But primarily we are optimizing the full experience, sort of end to end. How do we make sure that a user who purchases a light is able to actually connect that light and make it internet connected, right? Because a lot of people right now are buying smart lights, paying a lot for those smart lights, but ultimately just screwing them in and then using the light switch on the wall and not getting any value out of it.
Do you think we're gonna still have light switches down the road?
I think we will likely have something like light switches, because ultimately it there's a lot of things you can do via different types of interfaces, but the most basic interfaces I think we will still have for quite a while at least, because ultimately sometimes the easiest thing you can do is to walk up to a wall and turn a light switch, right?
It's so interesting, right? So I have two different lights brands in my house. And one brand basically it's switches that are smart, and then they switch the lights. So that's one approach. But then I have light bulbs that are smart. And actually, the light switch in the wall makes it difficult because if I turn off the light switch in the wall, there's no more power to the light that's smart. So
Mhm.
it's really actually an interesting dilemma. This is why I asked you, will there still be light switches and so forth? But I hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like back in the day, I set up all my lights to A, work with Alexa so that you would only kind of tell Alexa to turn on the lights. B, also turn on lights at different times of day and turn on. And then you're realizing that you find yourself in the sofa with the light right above you and it turns on and you actually have a migraine, and that was not ideal, right? So then you kind of need a way to interact with this automated flow you set up for yourself. So I think there's so many different use cases where you ultimately want to empower the human to do whatever they need to do in their life, right?
So I'm curious, you talk about user experiences and you working with a variety of different hardware vendors and different use cases. Tell me, what's one of your pet peeves that you see out today that you are fixing through Kraftful?
Yeah, so many, so many. I think the the big one that I'm seeing a lot is that there's a lot of smart home products that aren't making the product immediately useful for users, and so they're requiring users to do a ton of work before they can actually get some value out of it. So there's usually a complicated pairing process to set up the device. If you stuck around for the pairing process, you then have to do a ton of configuration and that kind of stuff. So I think like being able to do really seamless onboarding and deliver some amount of value to the user before you're asking them to do work is going to be really key.
What use cases do you tackle first? I mean, when you go and how old is Kraftful today?
We are, yeah, I believe we're 10-month-old. So baby steps at this point.
What were the use cases when you started that you sort of like tackled first? What are the first few use cases that you're going after?
Yeah, so we're going after a particular product categories. So right now it's lighting, thermostats, cameras, switches, and in locks, access control more broadly. And so primarily in the lighting space have had lots and lots of different use cases that we've tackled, primarily around onboarding. I think the piece that we're seeing the most is if we can deliver value early, that's going to get people hooked on a connected experience. So we're thinking a lot about how do you make sure that people get some immediate value out of their connected products before they have to invest more, both in terms of money and time, right?
So one of the things that I find so fascinating about startups is that, in a large company, the pace we go typically gives us time to sort of observe and see. And I don't know, I find them, my theory, and this might just be my fantasy, is that there's less unknowns, there's less surprises, if you wish. Versus when you work at your pace, you start a company 10 months ago, you got to deliver value fast. You do a business case, but then you find things you didn't anticipate, surprises, changes. What were the biggest surprises you found once you got into this space?
Yeah, so I think partly for me and my co-founder, we were lucky to be in this space even before we started Kraftful. So before Kraftful, I headed up the product management team at IFTTT, or If This Then That, but we actually call it IFT. My co-founder was our principal engineer, and so we worked with a lot of the same type of customers in a lot of the same type of problems, but from a slightly different angle. So I think we knew quite a lot about the industry and the challenges ahead of time. Some of the things that we've been surprised by having kind of stepped into this more is we assumed that we would be tackling the worst user experiences only. So when we started reaching out to companies, we were reaching out to folks who had the worst ranked apps and, and that kind of stuff. As we did more content strategy, the requests we got kind of inbound was from companies that were doing pretty well, considering in the smart home space. There's actually kind of, if you look around in the smart home space, and we've done a lot of analytics on this, is 80% of all smart home apps that we've reviewed, having reviewed hundreds of apps, have 3 or less stars in the App Store. So there's a lot of bad experiences out there. But nevertheless, I think what we saw was that actually it's a lot of the companies that are doing pretty well and have done a lot of things to improve their user experience that still are interested in improving it further, which kind of makes sense. But I think we were thinking about, we're kind of tackling the biggest problems, and now we're kind of operating in a more nuanced space.
I want to ask you a question, and I know I understand which space you work in, and but I am surprised how much you talk about how there's 3 stars only for apps, and then I walk into my office and I think I have almost no control over my environment around it. It's all automated, whatever that means. I find it so often now that the consumer apps drive the enterprise apps. Is that what you see in the home automation and in the lighting space as well? Or is the problem just a different one in an office versus a home? What's your take on consumer versus business?
Yeah, I think the problem is different. It's interesting because I think that's true for a lot of different products, generally speaking. Like productivity tools, the better productivity tools are actually like end consumer products that have since stepped into kind of the broader market, and they're sort of like shadow IT, and ultimately got adopted more and more within companies. There, the user is not the buyer, and so the products that were developed for enterprise, for commercial enterprise, are lagging behind because they didn't have to optimize for the user. I think for commercial lighting, it's a slightly different use case because the user is a little bit more the buyer, right? That you're walking into your office, you're not actually interacting with the connected light, right? Someone else does that. So there isn't that kind of interaction between the employee and the office manager for IT.
It's super interesting. I mean, what stuck in my head from everything you said was the user isn't the buyer. And I think that almost always puts the user experience not at the same level as it would be when the user is the buyer.
Yes, absolutely.
Comment. Thank you for that. So let me shift a little bit. You've made some really awesome posts on Twitter about a variety of things you have done and you do with your company around the current situation, what's going on around us, with us being more remote and so forth. I know you've been remote now at this point in time when we record this a month. Tell me a little bit, what does that mean to a company like you? What goes on today? What do you do? What changes? It's got to be scary to a certain extent. I know you got extra funding in January. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
That's an amazing time to do that. I'd just love to hear a little bit about how you see that, what's going on for you, both of you as the CEO and the mom of a small kid, as well as, both ways. So.
Yes, absolutely. So I think, there's so much, right, to that. So first of all, we never intended to be a remote company. And we, the co-founders were based in San Francisco. We were entirely an entirely non-remote company. We started working with some folks that were remote earlier, but I think generally speaking, our idea was to build up a team here in San Francisco. Obviously the current situation is thrown that a bit for a ride. So now we're thinking about how should we be building up a remote team. So we actually 2 weeks ago brought on board our first team member who's just been brought on 100% remote from day one, right? And so that's been an interesting experience, just thinking through how do you do that. I've actually worked with a lot of folks in the past remotely, but I think there's something special about bringing on board someone where you can't bring them in-house for a while to like do onboarding. And there's really, you know, we on his third day we did remote drinks over Zoom to welcome him on board and that kind of stuff. So I think there's a lot of interesting kind of just challenges growing a company in this climate. Personally, you kind of alluded to this, I'm a mom of a 3-year-old, so being kind of at a situation where suddenly, you know, I'm not getting all the help that I need to do my work full time. That's been really, really challenging. And so I think thinking about how do you you know, keep going in this kind of environment, knowing that it's temporary, but it still is really challenging to figure out, you know, when to do the work. I'm not even talking about work-life balance, because obviously that starting a company with a small child, you really don't have that. There's no life balance, but eventually there will be.
It's interesting, right? I have 2 boys, they're 20 and 22. And actually, is that right? Yeah, that's right. No, 23 actually, sorry. So in any case, as much as I feel lucky that I don't have the disruptions you do, my kids aren't with me where I'm at, and now I miss them. So it's a double-sided sword in some way, right?
Absolutely.
Some of that.
No, it is amazing to be with our families at this time. Still, even though it's challenging when some family members are more demanding, right? It still is. I do feel really grateful to be in a situation where I can be close to my family right now.
That's awesome. So one of the things startups have this ability to turn things quicker. What have you adjusted in your own plans that you can tell us about in your own, not just the way you work, but what you work on based on what's going on right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of things. Well, obviously, kind of, I alluded to some of it in terms of just going 100% remote. We were able to do it really early. Considering companies in the Bay Area were doing it early, we were even ahead of that by at least a week. So I think we reacted to it really quickly and did the cost benefit analysis that if one of us gets sick on a small team, the drawback is going to be much bigger than us being remote. So we very quickly just, you know, went 100% remote. Then the other thing is kind of thinking through how do we make sure we preserve our runway at these times. And so we've adjusted our hiring plan to be a little bit less aggressive, and really thinking through who are like the most key individuals we need to bring on board early, whereas some other roles that we can essentially work with contractors for to make sure, like, I guess we're optimizing for not laying people off. And I think having managed teams before, that's sort of a thing I'm thinking about a lot. I want to make sure we're building the company in a responsible way. I think a lot of startup founders who haven't been managers themselves don't really think through that piece as much. They're sort of just like doing what other startups are doing, and we're trying not to do that.
Got it. Yana, I appreciate your time. I don't have any more questions. I mean, I could talk to you for a long time. I'm just curious, anything in particular that you want to say to close it? Anything I didn't ask you? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks so much for having me on the show. Really, really excited to chat with you. I think the closing thought would be this current situation is really changing a lot about how we think about the world. So I think it's going to be interesting to see, for me personally, working with technology that's in the home, how the, you know, us hanging out at home is going to change that. But I think for pretty much any industry right now, so many things are being rethought and reimagined that it's a challenging but interesting time to be, starting a business and thinking about the future of the world.
It's great been talking with you. I wish you good luck. I hope things work. I mean, with us working more from home, I think what you do becomes even more important. So I feel great about this. And with that, I want to say thank you. Another Coffee Chat is coming to an end. If you missed any of today's or previous shows, please check out our playlist on YouTube or your favorite podcast, where you can find past episodes. And with that, I'm going to say, have a good day. Stay safe. Bye. Psh.